Welcome into Bucs Insider. We are coming to you from the Bucs Studio presented by Ticketmaster. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, staff writer Bree Dix. I don't know if you can tell, but we got some new digs here. We are really excited about this. These are our brand new studios. This is one of the sets, teaser. There's another one. You're going to see it in some of our other shows. But man, how cool do we feel and look in this set? I think we seem smarter already.
I kind of feel like a professional.
After what, 30-something years, you feel like a professional finally. We
Just got here.
But yeah, we are so excited. This is the new home of Bucs Insider. So every week, this is going to be where we're coming to you from. And so we're so excited to debut this show. And of course, because we're coming up on week one. What a perfect time to get a chance to be in these new studios because there is just, not only are we excited about this, I feel like there's a lot of excitement about the whole season. It's going to be incredibly fun to cover. Can't wait for this first game. And of course, before week one every year, this is when we tend to find out about our captains, as if we weren't already excited. Now we know these guys that are going to be walking out there. I feel like this team has no shortage of guys that could have qualified to be captains, which is really, really great. So first, let's announce who those are. We've got, shocker, Lavonte David, Mike Evans, Vita Vea, Baker Mayfield, Antoine Winfield Jr., and Tristan Wirfs. Again, shocking.
Yeah, well, Lavonte, this is 11 straight years for Lavonte. I mean, at this point, he's one of the most prominent players in franchise history, right? Yep. And then Mike Evans, 8 straight years for him. This is Vita's 3rd year in a row, and the other guys were all captains last year, too. So these are all repeat captains. And think about a couple in there on the end, Tristan Wirfs and Antoine Winfield Jr. Those are the first 2 picks in the 2020 draft. And, 4 years later, they're entrenched captains. One of the best starts to a draft the Buccaneers have ever had.
I completely agree. Yeah, I think this is a great group. And again, the fact that you have all repeats speaks to the fact that somehow Jason Light has been able to do the truly like reload as compared to rebuild. That they're now, it's a very similar roster in terms of who all your leaders are from year to year, and yet you've been able to get younger and keep being relevant. You didn't have to tear everything down, and I think that's a great sign.
And that's not by accident. That's the plan. Think about that image in the draft room of I am that man, and it's Lavonte David's silhouette. Yep,
which is pretty cool. All right, so Bree, let's talk a little bit more about this idea of this roster and the cut downs that have happened, who this 53 is going into week one. And, you know, every year, rightly, of course, we focus on a lot of the draft picks and some of those new free agents, but every year there's also some of these undrafted guys that sneak in there, get on the 53, have a chance to make a difference. Who have you noticed with that? And tell us a little bit about some of these maybe unsung guys.
So I feel like there were 2 players that were kind of under the radar, but you continuously heard from outside media, that you heard from the coaching staff, and that was wide receiver Cam Johnson and cornerback Tyreek Funderburk. Both made the roster as undrafted rookies. And for me, even more impressively, is you had a small sample size. So they both had injuries. Cam Johnson dealt with the ribs injury, Tyreek with the foot injury. And yet they still, the coaching staff saw enough and they impressed with the snaps they did get to earn a final spot on the roster, which is hard regardless. And then I think for Cam Johnson, he's just the guy that can do it all. You know, made a lot of impact on the screens, the end arounds, the sweeps, but he can stretch the field vertically, he can stretch it laterally. And one of the things he told me in Jacksonville was his speed. Is he thinks is his best trait because defenses don't know what they're getting. He said, I can use my speed, I can get downhill, or he was like, nobody beats me out of my brace with how quick I am. So I think that's going to be a big boost for the Bucs to be able to throw him in there. And then Tyreek Funderburk is a guy that really, whether it was the interceptions, whether it was the pass breakups, constantly found himself around the ball, has that anticipation, has the drive. And then one of the things that General Manager Jason Light really stressed is just his level of comfort in man on an island. And I think the most telling thing was at the podium, he said he's one of the most exciting young players at the position that we've had since I've been here. And that's right there alone. And he said we probably won't throw him out there right away, but he said he's almost to that point where they would feel comfortable throwing him out there in a game setting in a one-on-one with a receiver. So that right there should get fans excited.
You were talking about Cam Johnson's speed. Jeff Ryan and I got him on our Salty Dogs, shameless plug, episode this week. Check it out. And he is very excited about the possibility of being out there on kickoff returns. And I pointed out to him that the Buccaneers have not had a kickoff return for a touchdown since 2010, which is the longest drought in the NFL right now. And he said, that's going to change.
Doesn't lack in confidence, that one, does he?
I love the positivity.
He said, well, that's going to change. And it was like, he wasn't just Like maybe I'll get one.
Zero
Like, that's
hesitation.
happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, we were talking about this roster and the final 53 and some of the things that stood out to us. And that idea of the reload, not rebuild. And it's so wild to realize how recently we were the AARP roster.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
the Tom Brady teams?
The Tom Brady teams were an older group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly it has just turned 180 degrees and so quickly, which is amazing.
Very
so tell us a little bit about just how young this roster is and how amazing this turnaround is.
Well, it's only been, 4 years, maybe 3 years that this happened in? And the reason is the Bucs keep hitting in the draft. There are 22 of the 23 draft picks that Jason Light has made over the last 3 years are on this team, plus the undrafted players. There were 2 this year, but there were like 5 last year.
It's wild.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And so, I mean, second youngest roster in the league. And, there's third youngest starting lineup in the league.
Yeah, it's the 44 of the 53 players on the roster were either drafted by the Buccaneers or signed as undrafted free agents. And yeah, they're the youngest. It's the second youngest overall roster in the league, and then the third youngest starting lineup in the league.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so, and then to your point also, the homegrown nature, that not only is it young, but it's young guys that we found, that Jason Light and his staff have built this roster. This is what every GM dreams of, right? Like this is the goal, is this idea that you bring in these guys yourself, that this is such a homegrown roster. You mentioned 44 of the 53 guys are, and what we mean by homegrown is either they were drafted or signed as undrafted free agents as rookies. So they have started their career here with the Buccaneers, and then 20 of the 22 starters are also going to be that. And it's the only 2, it's Ben Bredeson and it's Baker Mayfield. So the entire defense is homegrown, and then you only have 2 guys on your offense that are not. And I just think that's an incredible statement to what this scouting staff has been able to do.
Exactly.
So, all right, let's move now into our trivia segment. So tell me, Scott, what stands out to you here about trivia? What made you pick what you had this week?
Well, I like to do something that involves the team we're about to play. And we had that great Super Bowl run in 2020, and so I'll let Bree read the question, but it's about that.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Drum roll. When the Buccaneers beat Washington 31-23 in the wild card round of the 2020 playoffs to start their Super Bowl run, who sacked Taylor Heineke on 3rd down to kill Washington's last drive?
Don't reveal it, but do you remember?
Maybe?
Take
I think
a guess.
that's a no.
A guess. I mean, man, I don't know.
That
I feel
team
like,
had Shaq, it had JPP.
I know. That's why I was thinking I was going to go with one of those 2 guys.
All right.
So
Well, we'll see.
That felt like the safe answer, so we'll go with that. And then, all right, so how about some milestones here? What are we going to be tracking? That's always one of the fun things to watch throughout the season, is not just wins and losses, but some of the numbers that guys are striving for. And I feel like the main guy we're always watching is Mike Evans, because I feel like every day he's hitting new milestones.
When we started last season, we were talking about Mike Evans and his Hall of Fame case, and we were feeling like, I think he's got a shot, maybe a couple more. By the end of that season, there's no more question. Everybody's pretty much sure that Mike Evans has now made a Hall of Fame resume. It's just a matter of will he be a first ballot guy or not. And one of the reasons I say that is he has 94 touchdown receptions in his career. So he starts this season needing 6, and there's only
camps out in that end zone.
I'm not sure. Maybe there's one season where he didn't have at least 6 touchdowns. Mike Evans, if you were a betting person, Mike Evans to get over under 6 touchdowns, everybody's taking the over on that one. So he needs 6 touchdowns to get to 100. You know how many players in the history of the NFL have 100 receiving touchdowns? 10.
Wow.
10. Now, Devontae Adams is also one ahead of Mike, so he could get there too. But right now, there's 10.
That's
an incredible fraternity. He's almost certainly going to join, and to me, that just burnishes his Hall of Fame resume.
Well, and to think, too, that he's had that level of production with a revolving door
quarterback,
multiple offensive coordinators, multiple different systems throughout, but he still had this same level of production year in, year out, to me, is the most
I think we're to the point where he's kind of underappreciated.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. I mean,
same with Levante David.
Yeah, it's like.
Speak of the devil. When Levante,
your next milestone, Marco.
When Levante David takes his first snap on Sunday against Washington, he will have played in 13 seasons for the Buccaneers, and he'll be only the 4th player ever to do that.
Wow.
He's tying Dave Moore, and the only 2 with Moore are Rondé Barber and Derek Brooks, who are already in the Hall of Fame.
Incredible. I mean,
some pretty big milestones coming up.
Yeah. And he just keeps doing it at such a high level.
Well, he was so good last year.
Yeah, he just does. He seems like the ageless wonder. Like he's Benjamin Buttoning. He's going backwards. It's pretty incredible. All right, so now we're also going to look a little bit into our fantasy watch. Tell me, Scott, what are you looking for? This is your baby.
Because I know you two aren't real big into fantasy.
I'm just, it's probably because when I played, I got last the first time, and I was like, well, you know what? Forget this. You forced me, and then I got last. It was embarrassing. I can't believe I'm even allowed to be an insider here based on how my fantasy went.
We'll let me handle this segment.
Yes.
So, I was in a fantasy draft last night, as a matter of fact, and I was dying to get Chris Godwin. It was like the 7th round, I think, and he got taken 2 picks before me, and I got very mad at the guy who was on speakerphone. I may have said some words that I can't say here. I missed him, because here's the thing. Chris Godwin, his ADP, which is average draft position, is around, depending on what site you're looking at, around 73, 75. So depending on a 10 or a 12-team draft, you're thinking end of 6th, beginning of 7th round, something like that. You get that guy, he's moving back into the slot. Last time he was in the slot, he caught 104 passes. I mean, primarily in the slot. And the thing about Chris that has driven down his fantasy value in the last few years is he only has, I think, 5 touchdowns in the last 2 years combined, despite catching like 200-something passes.
Wow.
And that's it's the lowest percentage in the league. So he, from fantasy terms, has not produced to where people expected when they drafted him. But the Buccaneers have made a point of saying they would need to get Chris Godwin more involved in the red zone this year, and we saw it in training camp. They were throwing it to him a lot. So if Chris Godwin gets, say, 7 touchdowns and 100 catches, and you get him in the 7th round, that's a steal.
I agree with that. I think that everyone has just been talking about how Chris Godwin is only poised to do more this year. That I think that's where it is interesting with fantasy. Everybody looks at the stats last year. It's the first thing. And if you look at that with Chris, you're right. You're going to think, I don't really know.
Yeah, around 1,000 yards.
Yeah, like cool. Not bad. Like,
2
but from a fantasy standpoint, like maybe not your guy, but man, I think everyone that's been paying attention to the Bucs, what Liam Cohen's talked about, what Chris has said about it, if you've really been paying attention to that, I think there's no reason Chris shouldn't have more fantasy stats.
Now, if you're trying to make decisions this week, if you've already had your fantasy draft, which you probably did because tonight the season starts,
right.
You might want to look at the Bucs receivers. I assume if you drafted Mike Evans, you're starting him regardless. Chris Godwin, I don't know, maybe you're thinking flex, maybe not. The Washington defense finished last in the league in points allowed last year, last in yards allowed, and last specifically in passing yards allowed. And they have a couple of big corners in Benjamin St-Juste and Michael Davis, who they just added, who are big guys and physical guys, and so they can match up with our big receivers. But I think there's an opportunity for us maybe to get some big plays on those guys. Benjamin St-Juste allowed a lot of receptions on targets last year. So, if I were trying to decide whether to put my Buccaneers receivers in week to week, this week I would definitely put them in.
Yeah, and a couple of their corners with nickel outside, some of their guys are smaller. You got one that weighs...
The slot is.
Yeah,
the
165, and guys that when you look at Mike Evans and even Chris Godwin, and you're looking at someone that's 165, I'm like, I'm going to bet I feel like I could just kind of loft one up in the air for Chris Godwin or Mike Evans on those
Well,
moments.
their slot corner is their second-round rookie, Mikey Sainristil from Michigan, and I think he's a really, really good player. But like you said, he's not big, and he's playing his first game. So no matter if he's going to be a great corner in this league,
it's a tough
his
first
draw.
Game, right? Tough first draw for him.
Start Chris Godwin.
Yes, that's the takeaway.
I can't because I didn't get him.
Yeah. But he's not
Other
bitter.
than that, I'm fine.
Not bitter, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so Bree, next up, we're going to get into our human interest off the field segment. We're going to try and do one of these every week of just something that is a little bit non-football about our roster. And we know you got a chance to do a really cool new feature this offseason. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes. So had the goal throughout the offseason to do the Behind the Buccaneers series, but kind of extend it a little bit to where I go to the player's hometown, talk with the family, and really get into the places that change the trajectory of that player's life.
Jordan Whitehead.
Me just being from here, growing up, is you run the ball, you tackle, and that's kind of the mindset it was when growing up. It's the grit football.
In high school, some of the games we were like, this is embarrassing, take him out. Every time we would get the ball, like seriously, it would just be touchdown.
What a game he has had.
He's still a kid trapped in a grown man's body.
Big time plays, big time plays, big time game.
And I think that's why he plays the game the way he does. He's having fun.
Working out in a garage, little garage, old school weights.
Too pleased at work, you know.
Well, you don't have a lot. You gotta just, you gotta use what you got.
I got my mindset just to be tough, and that's exactly what I pride myself on.
For Jordan Whitehead, that was pivotal because that city, Western PA, that area, Aliquippa, Central Valley, all of those things built his physical play style and is why he does play the way that he does and is that hard-hitting, has the downhill prowess, and has made him so good in a Todd Bowles system is because of where he was raised. And, I mean, you're talking about a guy that at 5 years old is lifting rusted dumbbells in this little 10-by-10 garage. All the neighborhood kids are coming. So, and I am so excited for it to go out. Months and months of preparation, months of writing, a lot of interviews. I think his mom laughed and was like, I think you know more about my son than most people or probably you ever intended knowing.
Yeah.
But for not only people just to get the backstory of his makeup and the drive that he has, but also just the incredible human being that he is. And I think we can all agree that he's one of the best people you will ever meet, and his family is no different. And just the close-knit community there that he has was really incredible in the support system.
And if you're, I mean, how are you not already rooting for Jordan Whitehead? But I'm sure at the end of reading this, everyone even more so that there's rooting for the Bucs, and then there's even having individual guys that you have a reason to care about and want to make those plays. And Jordan is that guy with his smile that is just always there and infectious, his attitude. And it's amazing to look back at the excitement people had when he came back. And of course, part of it was rather good at football. People were like, this is going to make a difference on Sunday. But I think just as much, if not more, it was everyone just being excited to have such a great guy back in the building and to get a chance for you to do, there's the long form written part of it, there's video, there's all these different elements of you got him from every angle for everyone to get a chance to know. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it turned out fantastic. Nice job.
Thank you.
I feel like, obviously, Jordan's the main character in that story, but I feel like the garage was a character.
Yes.
I mean, you really, I felt like I could picture it. I mean, he showed pictures, but like the description of the garage and what it meant to him and everything he did in there. And then that hill, what was it called? Stop sign hill?
Yes. So, and it's funny because we actually weren't even headed to the garage. That kind of was a destination change. We were actually headed to the main house that he grew up in that his mother's sister now lives in. And we're on the way there, and then Jordan and his mom were in front of us and called Danny and I. And we're like, hey, why don't we just go stop at this little garage that I used to work out in? Yeah. And we pull up, and Danny and I are like, this is a gold mine. There's, I mean, his entire career is chronicled on the wall. You have he had height indicator pencil markings of where he progressed throughout.
Classic.
I mean, just everything that they kept. And I think that's just a testament of the pride that his family has in him and his abilities. So yes, very, very proud of that piece and was very, very exciting for that.
That's great. So make sure all of you go check that out. It is up now. It is really incredible. So let's move on to this upcoming game against the Washington Commanders. Week 1, we're finally here all off season. We've waited and now it's finally here. So I know earlier you mentioned the stats about the Washington Commanders defense. Both of you talked about this, and that last year was not great for them.
Yes.
Not ideal. They obviously knew that and were like, let's change everything. That was their philosophy. So we know, obviously, they brought in new head coach, defensive-minded guy, but not only that, they just overhauled this defense, unlike anything we see very often. I mean, this is like a whole, I mean, they practically did a factory reset. That I think of one of the depth charts, and of course we always know depth charts are a little finicky depending on what package you start in, but of the depth chart that I took a look at, 7 of the 11 starters on defense are new to the team. That's wild. 2 of the returning, of course, are their defensive tackles, Payne and Jonathan Allen, former Pro Bowlers on big deals.
The strength of their defense.
Yeah, that makes sense that you're going to keep those couple guys for sure. But then, I mean, especially the defensive end front, you've got new guys from free agency, Clellan Ferrell, Dorrance Armstrong, and then linebacker stuff, you got Bobby Wagner from Seattle. Oh, look, another vet, number 54. He and Levante going to be out there. And what I will say is, I mean, Bobby Wagner, we know his past and history, but is he is he aging backwards like Levante? It'll be interesting to see now. He's been in the league for so long.
Yeah.
What does he have now at this point in his career? What Bobby Wagner are we getting?
Well, I think he led the league in tackles last year.
Yeah, so he also seems to be one of those guys that has figured out.
Plus, he just brings that veteran influence.
The ageless wonder, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course you got the fast and versatile Frankie Louvu, another guy that they brought in, which is going to be really interesting. You got Dante Fowler coming in, who obviously has experience with Quinn in Dallas a little bit. Jeremy Chin is now there. He mentioned how well the scheme is fitting him and how Quinn is using him all over the place, so a lot of versatility there, which is interesting. You mentioned their second-round pick that's going to be starting at nickel, so that's the one that I think size is going to be interesting to see. Rookie versus some extreme vets will be an interesting matchup. But to me, a big question is going to be, just because you've changed everything, what does that mean of how much better does it get or not, and how quickly are they gelling? How quickly have they picked up a new scheme from this new head coordinator? That's a lot to ask to get a whole new defense together under a new defensive-minded coach. We hear so often the guys talk about how nice it's been that they've been playing under Todd Bowles for so long, and what that means for the chemistry and the communication skills. So I feel like this is where, man, it's going to be fun to see how our offense tries to maybe get them where they're having to try to communicate a lot more than maybe they're prepared to be. So I think it'll be interesting to watch. It's a whole new group of people. How quickly have they been able to gel together?
It's probably good that we're getting them in week one.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, because almost all those players you mentioned are obviously good players. Like Frankie Louvu came over from the Panthers. We know him well from playing him. He's a good player. But you said 7, right?
Yeah.
7 of the 11. That looks good on paper, but it might be a while till it can gel. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe they're great, but
We'll see.
I kind of like that idea.
And so we brought up Dan Quinn. He's obviously a huge part of that, defensive-minded guy, and first time as the head coach here of the Commanders. You also spent some time in Dallas and are familiar. Tell us what you think about, we talked about all these new players. What does he in particular bring to this defense?
Well, Dan Quinn is very similar to Todd Bowles in that he's very aggressive in his approach. And I think one of the things, and you mentioned it a little bit, but that is always surrounding Dan Quinn is his ability to maximize the personnel that he has and the players that he has. He's a very players coach guy, and he's very energetic, and the players feed off of that. Like, this was a guy in Dallas that he is literally grabbing pads during drills and simulating crackback blocks to get his players prepared for the opposition that they're going to face. And players would eat that up. But, I mean, he's just had success in playing into player strengths. Like, you look at what he did with Michael Parsons in Dallas, using him all over the line. And this is a guy that, as a rookie in training camp, he saw him, he saw the explosiveness, the first step, he saw what he was going to be able to do, and he built pressure packages around him with kind of that 4-3 hybrid sub-package system. But even when he was in Seattle, kind of led them back to their Legion of Boom status in 2013. And then in Dallas, for the time he was there, they led the NFL in takeaways in 2021 and 2022, and then they had a top 5 scoring defense in 2022 and 2023. And this was a defense that just a couple years prior was the last in the NFL. So it has kind of that ability to resurrect a defense, but also he was pretty vocal there about when he had a little bit of a break in between Seattle and going to Dallas, where he really kind of took, and then said, cover 3 is kind of not really working anymore with the way that the league's evolving. So he kind of incorporated more zone match, more man match, and was able to move with the times and had success there. So I think in Washington, you obviously mentioned with Jonathan Allen, with Deron Payne, that kind of being the dynamic duo in the interior. But, I mean, you bring a guy back in, Bobby Wagner, that he had experience with in Seattle, and then Dorrance Armstrong in Dallas, a guy that went from kind of being an afterthought on the depth chart to being one of the most improved players on that roster in their defense. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, you don't want him to have, the success in week 1 going against our team, but I think he's going to have a positive spin on Washington's defense.
For sure. And now we've talked a lot about their defense, but we know the big storyline is that they got this new rookie quarterback. So tell me your thoughts on Jaden Daniels and the Bucs facing him and how we think that's going to go.
Okay, but I probably didn't do as much research as you both did. So I'm just going to say Jaden Daniels runs real fast.
You know what, though? That's about all the scouting report needs to be. I feel like that's probably what they're in meeting rooms right now saying the same thing.
I feel like I just heard Dan Quinn's entire career.
Life story, yeah.
It was great. No, Jaden Daniels, obviously dual threat, won the Heisman Trophy, has some records from in terms of the only guy to, I don't remember him exactly, but the only player in FBS history to pass for
a lot of yards.
A lot of yards and to run for a certain amount of yards. He had a game against Florida where he became the first guy ever to pass for 350 plus yards and run for 200 plus yards. And the thing is, this guy runs and he does not shy away from contact, and he's willing to take on anyone. He's very dangerous with his legs. He's a rookie quarterback making his first regular season start, and I think that defensive coordinators, especially aggressive guys like Todd Bowles, lick their chops at that kind of thing and are thinking, okay, we're gonna throw the kitchen sink at this guy and see what he can handle. And probably if you were looking at that matchup, you would think Todd and his defense has a bit of a edge when it comes to passing, because Jaden Daniels is probably going to become a superstar, but it's his first game, and you hope you can confuse him and get some mistakes and turnovers. But it doesn't matter that it's his first game when it comes to his running. That's going to translate immediately to the NFL. So keeping the edge and not letting him get out, because he gets out to run. Some quarterbacks like Caleb Williams, another great rookie, moves around in the pocket in order to extend plays and throw.
Right.
Jaden, when he takes off, he's running.
Yeah.
Now, maybe they're trying to get him out of that a little bit, but that's his main goal. And so the Buccaneers, just like when we played Jalen Hurts the first time in the playoffs a few years ago, we've done it twice, but the first time, it was pretty early in his career, and Todd Bowles was able to completely shut him down in terms of running, and the Buccaneers won the game. And I think that's what they're going to have to do with Jaden Daniels.
All right, and injury report. That's the last little piece of this puzzle here in this matchup.
Yes.
Bree, tell me, who do we got? Who do we not got?
So the positive update from the week is that Yaya Diaby, Jordan Whitehead, and Joe Tryon-Shoyinka have been full participants in practice.
Yes.
However, defensive lineman Logan Hall and kicker Chase McLaughlin have not been practicing. So they will both be the keys to kind of keep an eye on Logan Hall dealing with the foot injury, and then Chase McLaughlin with an undisclosed illness and abdomen.
Yeah. You only
you
only have one kicker on the roster.
That's
so
the big problem.
That's kind of an issue.
Are you going to be sent out there if asked?
Well,
you ready?
I'm just saying, if it becomes an issue later in the week, there's going to have to be some sort of roster move.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. And then, of course, we can't leave you without answering the trivia question from earlier. What do we got as our answer?
Did you decide if it was Shaq or JPP?
By the way you're asking that, I think it doesn't matter. I have a feeling you're baiting me into a wrong answer here.
It was Levante David. Big
so
sack.
wrong on all accounts.
You know, I should just know that if it's an offensive trivia question, Mike Evans. If it's a defensive trivia question, it's Levante David. I should know by now, even when it's tricky like that.
Levante, the last few years, Devin White, who's so good at blitzing up the middle, has been your main linebacker, off-ball linebacker that you send. I wonder if we'll see more Levante blitzing this year, because he's probably the better of the two between him and KJ Britt. You may not realize this, Levante's in the top 10 in team history in sacks.
I mean, of course he is. Of course he is. He's just incredible
And
at everything.
And that was a big one.
That was a big one. All right, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Bucs Insider. Thank you all so much for being here with us, and we'll be back here next week.